Hello, good morning everybody. This morning when I passed the aisle in the museum and passed the courtyard, this green courtyard, where you or some of you were exercising and make the warm up, someone exclaimed, "I am so happy," and I have to say I'm happy too that we can gather today for this symposium, the Act of Hearing. My name is Hans-Jürgen Lechtreck. I am the Deputy Director of the museum, and I just want to give you some words of welcome this morning. We are very pleased to be able to welcome you here at the Museum Folkwang on the occasion of this symposium. I think for all of us, it has been a long time of uncertainty and short-term planning. This symposium has been postponed several times, but now we are here. And therefore, it is particularly wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much for being here with us today. I especially want to welcome our guests and contributors to the symposium. Some of you, I have heard, have traveled long distances, and we are also delighted to have you with us to participate and to share your knowledge and your experience with us. Thank you very much. It is not it was long missed that this is possible, that you make this means and make this effort to come to Essen and to contribute to this event. Very important, I think, that we take up this action after the long time of the lockdown and closed institutions and low possibilities to meet and to exchange. I would also like to acknowledge the dedication and the hard work of my colleagues, without whom this event would not be possible. In particular, I want to thank Luísa Saraiva, Peter Daners, and Isabel Hufschmidt for organizing this symposium. They not only had the idea for the Act of Hearing, but also approached the experts and contributors and gathered them for today and the following 2 days. And I also want to say thank you to our supporters, the Kunststiftung NRW, the Alfred and Claire Potts Stiftung, and the Kunststiftung Folkwang. Over the last 12 months, they stood by their decision to make this project possible. It was wonderful that they stick to this decision, and we are very grateful for their commitment and, of course, for their financial support. One of the things that had become more clearer to me personally during the last months is that museums, theaters, concert halls, and opera houses are not only about displaying art or staging plays, music, and dance. Cultural institutions and many other places in the public space want to bring people together, to give opportunities to meet friends and to make new acquaintances, to talk and to discuss what they have seen and what they have been listening to. That's why, to me, the idea and the concept of this symposium seems to be very timely, because it's about contact, about gathering, about meeting, about exchange. It brings together people with different artistic and scientific backgrounds and puts the human body and its sensibility in the center of shared activities and conversation. This has, of course, a special meaning in these days, after the pandemic has made us aware of how vulnerable we are and how much we benefit and depend from social context and on social context. Therefore, I am sure that you will take good care of yourself and the other participants, and that we have a very productive and fruitful time in the next 3 days. Before I hand over to the next speaker, I just want to say one more time, thank you very much, and I wish you and all of you a very enjoyable and productive time here in the Museum Folkwang. Welcome very much, and thank you.
Hello together. Hope my lipstick is not confused. So, dear hosts, artists and guests, dear Luísa Saraiva, welcome to this performative symposium, which can finally take place after nerve-wracking restrictions, resistances, and postponings due to a seemingly never-ending pandemic challenge. One of the event's major topics, the resonating body, which specifically refers to the relationship between movement, sound, and its corporealities, is a core element of any performative act. Already the concept performativity denotes a transition, a threshold situation, a movement, and not the conclusion of an action. According to John L. Austin, the developer of the speech act theory, which he unfolded in 1955 in his famous lecture and later publication, How to Do Things with Words, performativity characterizes an intermediate state which references the process of and a particular approach to making associations posed by immanent dynamics and ambivalence. Consequently, hearing and voicing, listening and negotiating are some of the ultimate tools to enact a performative situation. Demands for a transformative listening, as formulated by author and curator Ranjit Hoskote, or composer Pauline Oliveros' proposal for a deep listening, or John Cage's interpretation of a silence filled with sound, or author Hakim Bey's inscription to those who watch like poets and listen like thieves, all of these represent an altered form of cultural, artistic, or aesthetic dialogue as signs of a stimulus for present and future thought, which is characterized by openness, curiosity, sensuality, and respect to learning other modes of understanding and communicating, or a wild thought in the sense of anthropologist Lévi-Strauss. Just a footnote at this point. The openness to chance, transformation, or contingency in an expanded communication is of course ultimately linked to further layers in the sense of defining, reflecting, providing and implementing altered spatial, temporal, dramaturgical, and discursive elements. And here, the underlying questions would be, are those, as artists Elmgren and Dragset once criticized, powerless structures which foster the empowerment of the participant, performer? Moreover, in a performative context, the importance of translating seems to be crucial, of physical and mental micro-events featuring the significance of gesture, sound, and gaze, of relationships between pre-verbal acts such as body language, gestural language, and imaginary language, of breathing, listening, uncontrollable voices, noises, and utterances. Can you hear me? When spoken language and image lose their status as prevalent materiality, when things cannot be intellectually grasped, when the body denies the voice and reveals its own fragility and precariousness. This is the ideal situation for a performative act to take place, filled with unforeseen moments, open to negotiating and translating, during which an expanded knowledge can be produced or revealed. By including the bodily dimension of transitoriness and permeability, the performative act can potentially affect the nature of private, social, cultural, and political relations, for example, through irritating moments that transpire or through pauses where nothing seems to be happening. Can you hear me now? As a research-oriented, transdisciplinary format, the ACT of Hearing aims at generating new interpretative approaches and correlations among artistic disciplines and the academic field. Regrettably, such attempts of a cross-fertilization of ideas is still not a common practice. All the more, I'd like to thank Museum Folkwang and Luísa Saraiva, who both showed curatorial elasticity and nerves of steel. Congratulations to an exciting program which the Kunststiftung NRW is happy to support. For the upcoming 3 days, I wish all of you an enlightening and pleasurable experience here in Essen. Thank you.
So after this great introduction, I don't have much more to say. Of course, I am very happy that this is finally taking place. I want to thank very much, of course, Herr Lechtreck and Frau Peters for being here doing this introduction, and for all the artists and lecturers and guests that have accompanied us through a journey of 2 years of planning, replanning, remaking, postponing, rethinking, and the support of the museum was indispensable. And of course, I have to do this is the moment to make a big thank you to Peter Danas, that was doing this event, preparing this event with me, and for all his effort and for all the extra work that this situation entails in order for us to be here live together. But it's of course a great pleasure that we can be in a room with all the necessary safety measures, but that this can happen live. And this project comes, the topic of this project, I will just say shortly a few words about that. Has a lot to do with my research as an artist, and it was the same with Corporeality in 2018, so the first edition. And for me, it is very important to, as an artist, have this moment of organizing an event where, and collaborating with the house, I can invite other artists with whom I have affinities, with whom I share processes, themes that I necessarily might have had an encounter before or not, but that this is a different way to approach curation because it comes from the working methodologies and processes that we engage with when we are creating work, and also understanding that the practices of research can be very similar across genres, across the academic, the scientific, the artistic field, and that it's very important to create bridges of dialogue between the different disciplines and not rather see each work as something static. And yes, that was the main reason why we opted for this format of the performative symposium and of doing this research on lecturers that have common points and affinities with the works that are being shown of the artists. And with some of the artists, there are people who had an important role in my development as an artist. For example, I met Jonathan in 2015, and at the time I saw one of his works, and it was very striking for me, and that's why I wanted to invite him. And for example, both Flore de Tras and Hinge, I don't dare to say the last name, I will say it wrong, but Tillman will later say it correct. I have never met them before, but I had been in many festivals where we shared a stage, and there's so little opportunities to meet in a different context and to also discuss the processes of working together. And that was the reason why to choose artists who somehow share a common understanding of creating and developing work. And I guess that's enough as an introduction. I will give the word to Tine Melzer and to Tillman before, who will introduce her and who was very kind to be here and moderate the whole symposium and also help us with this endeavor. And I hope very much you can enjoy the 3 days. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Hello everybody, guten Tag. I will be very brief. Ich heiße Tillman, my name is Tillman. I will be moderating the weekends. You'll hear more from me, or hopefully less from me, and more from the artists and researchers later in the course of today and the next 2 days. But I just wanted to thank Luísa and the museum for having me, and what a privilege to be in a room with other people after this year and a half of being mostly shut up in small areas and spaces. So to really be able to hear and resonate with people is a great gift, and I'm very happy to be here. Without further ado, I want to introduce Tine, our first speaker. Tine Melzer works as an artist, author, and researcher with a focus on language. She makes books, public work, and writes prose and essays. Her literary work is represented by Liebman Agency. She studied fine arts and philosophy in Amsterdam and received her PhD from the University of Plymouth for research on Ludwig Wittgenstein and Gertrude Stein. Saying those two names next to one another fast 5 times is a good tongue twister. Today she teaches at HKB, Bern University of the Arts. Tine Melzer taught at the Gerrit Rietveld Academy, Amsterdam, and at various academies and universities throughout Europe. Her work has been internationally exhibited at the Stedelijke Museum in Amsterdam, the Irish Museum of Modern Art, the Museum for Hedendaagse Kunst in Antwerpen, and the Helmhaus in Zurich, and published internationally, including the award-winning Taxidermy for Language Animals. Without further ado, Tine, welcome.
It's like with magic. I have everything prepared under the table. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Luísa. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the ones who are here in presence, risking their life for some culture. I'm not the technical dude, but they are great. They will help me whenever needed, and you will be patient if things get stuck. Huh? Is this going to be all the time like this, or is it going to be a bit smoother? Yes, it is. This is the book that was mentioned just now. It's a surprise success because who would have known that people are interested in the philosophy of language? It's a very well camouflaged book because it weighs like a good manual or phone book, and it's very colorful and with very big letters inside. So you don't have to read it, you can also just look at the images. And that is maybe also what I'm going to bring to you today. Because as promised, as an artist and philosopher of language and researcher in the arts, capturing multiple meanings is central. And often image-text relationships manage to demonstrate shifts of meanings exemplarily. So even if you're bored by what I say, I promise there will be images to enjoy and vice versa. They might not always fit. Aspect seeing is a term used by the Austrian-British philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein to designate something everyday, almost banal. Seeing something from different sides. Well, thank you. To become aware of simultaneous perspectives. To pursue this linguistically and recognize even more hidden aspects and meanings. So we know his very famous example that you've seen before many times, and you belong either to the one or the other family. Either you see first a duck and then a rabbit, or first a rabbit and then a duck. Some people claim they can see both at once. This is mentally very tricky. Don't try, you might get caught up. This example is borrowed from Joseph Trastrow, who in turn took it from the joke magazine Fliegende Blätter. So it was not at all supposed to be philosophy. It was just a joke. Which animals are the closest together? Ha, 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 the rabbit and the duck. The rabbit duck or the duck rabbit, and that depends on which figure is recognized first. And so the image shifts in front of your eyes. And even for those who are afraid to read Ludwig Wittgenstein, do yourself a pleasure, get yourself the book in English or German or whatever is your preferred language. You don't need to read everything, you can flip through it, and you might find this super beautiful, nice drawing from the hand of the master. And I must distinguish between the continuous seeing of an aspect and the aspects lighting up. The picture might have been shown to me without my ever seeing in it anything else but a rabbit. So he kind of illustrates some of his thoughts with simple, nice drawings, which is always good for us to rest our mind and to go from letter to image and back again. So, like the hare duck picture, a word is suddenly in two places at once. And we know such images from psychology. We know the Rorschach test. What do we think of? What aspect do we recognize in an arbitrary symmetrical ink blob? Our brain can't help recognizing similarities and connecting them, and we know that we are prone to look at symmetries and go, ha, it's a face, or ha, it's a vulva, depending very much on what you think of at the moment. And depending on how it is used, aspect vision is sometimes a very casual game with familiar similarities, something like a subtle way of working around hinges in image and words. Sometimes the words we read or hear make us see new meanings. Please do not think of divorce when you see this image. And after all, jokes are not always funny or witty, and words are multi-sided. And aspect vision turns joke into bitter serious instruments for pointing out ignorance or dogma, power or civilizational folly, or with jokes we know when we see just a single word becomes the hinge for the punchline. Well, but what happens when we actually get it? You were laughing, I hear there's sounds in the air, I hear breathing in. Understanding is rewarded by dopamines. Bring on the body's own drugs. Yes, I got it. Reward is released when you understand something. Insight gets our circulation going, we breathe in oxygen and rewarding hormones shoot through our blood, our pupils dilate. Yeah, aha! I got it. We are rewarded for belonging. It is also sociologically very important because we don't want to be excluded by the group. Everyone laughs and I missed the cue. So in the research on the practical application of aspect vision in the arts, the subjects, that's you now, often enjoy being exposed to ambiguity. That's strange because usually we don't enjoy being exposed to ambiguity. But with an apple we could try. There's a test. What does an apple stand for? With each of these words, there was some of your neurons shooting very fast through your brain and they made a connection. Maybe some of you are not familiar with Wilhelm Tell, because you might not live in Switzerland, but that even you could Google. For the rest, the Beatles is just very sure, and the Newton thing, ouch, we have absolutely found gravity just a few seconds ago ourselves. So words are tipping pictures. We thank Magritte for solving some of the biggest issues between language and text. What language is remains always just a question. Some things are easier to say and others to show. And even if you really don't like Ludwig Wittgenstein, that is worth remembering. It also sometimes helps to save relationships. Also in the visual arts, an image in conjunction with an individual word or a short sentence produces an aha experience. This is what aspect vision can look like. Deciphering names, gathering as many associations as possible, comparing vocabularies, and associating and sorting meanings, but very, very fast in your brain, and you often do it even unawares. In the work of the Dutch artist Frans Oosterhoff from 1994, plaatsbepaling, or locating, or ortung, again we are facing problems of translation here, you see a forest scene, which is sometimes viewed as romantic picnic, soon as a dangerous trap, because the mental subtitling sorts the signs on the image for us in such a way that at one time the solitude in the forest means privacy, another time helplessness. Often a word, a text, acts like a pointing finger, a signpost to an aspect in the picture that initially knows no reading direction. And through the words said, written, heard, it gets a direction, a reading direction. An image gets an order. We squeeze language out. Yet seeing here is a metaphor for insight, but insight is again a metaphor for understanding. And understanding, as we learned, creates bliss. So we're very happy when we get things, because also our stress level gets down. When we have loose ends in our mind, we don't like it. It costs too much energy for us. So we humans are made to puzzle together meanings. We are really made for reading the world. We want things to fit. We want meanings to occur, to solve the riddle. We need to match what we experience with what we know. The brain researcher, Dr. Silvia Meyer from Zurich, reminds me in personal conversation recently, last week, that we are, as humans, are constantly busy with modeling the world. That is how she calls that, constantly trying to create a model that fits our experiences with the world. We use all capacities we have in order to create a model which fits the world in which we need to constantly update our experiences, our expectations. Our communication influences the urgency of these updates. And it costs a lot of energy to update. So sometimes we might choose to suppress a negative emotion rather. Some situations require suppression of an unpleasant emotion, and others allow for an immediate update. But always, Meyer claims, humans try to avoid insecurity. Ambiguity is an uncertainty of meaning. It is naturally so, she says, that humans flee ambiguity and plurality of meaning. In an animalistic point of view, or also with children, we also just want to survive the next day, create apt models of the world to navigate through it. Communication with others is a crucial source for the input for these models. So we learn from each other and from each other's actions. And we have to cope with emotions, and we relentlessly update our models of the world. And in that, language is more than a vehicle for meaning. It influences and shapes our thoughts. It works literally to convey so-called information and is capable of producing spontaneous metaphors to bridge different sensations of our body. Metaphors bridge these different fields, and they manage to communicate sense data through speech and writing. It sounds really technical. Metaphors are mapping devices, and seeing as such metaphor for getting something, hearing as metaphor for receiving information is part of this program, taking hearing as more as an audible signal. Hearing is a fine sense, less loud than vision. And anyone who listens is fundamentally open. Without this kind of openness to one another, there's no genuine human relationship. Belonging together always also means being able to listen to one another, says Hans-Jürgen, a hermeneuticist. We get back to this in a second, but first about hearing. Let's first have a look about hearing, and we look into the medical side of it, because as medics know, this is not an ear, we know this too, but medics know that hearing is one of the first senses to develop in the womb of a mother's child. There's touch as well, yes, but let's stick to the hearing. The sense of hearing is prior to vision. It is echoing the world's frequencies and delivers us a sense of orientation. After birth, we may experience some vertigo, an unpleasant sensation when inadequate. On a boat in roaring sea, we may undergo a sense of disorientation. Seasickness turns our stomach, and all this simply because our sense of hearing is also commanding the sense of place in space. And the beautifully named organ inside our heads, no, not the brain, and not even the ear, but the labyrinth, consists of an ingeniously shaped tiny ornamental form, a tiny sculpture to give our body a sense of up and down. When we grow older, then the tiny particles hitting the sides of the labyrinth from within may delude our senses. Some old fall because the movement registered in the labyrinth are in fact illusionary data. Finally, we know from Samaritans, from doctors, and from emergency crew that the sense of hearing is also the last one to leave us. Even in unconsciousness, immovability, and failure to communicate with the outside world, the sense of hearing remains intact. We know from witnesses of cruel accidents that they can hear every word that is said in the scene. So don't go like, oh my God, there's so much blood and the legs are cut off. Will he ever survive? People hear this, and that might be the sentence for them to leave. Don't speak about them, speak with them. So when hearing remains intact as the last sense before death, and we should remember the persistence of hearing when we stand on the bedside of a fatal patient. Peter Handke, long time ago, has collected buzzwords, Reizworte, in die Innenwelt der Außenwelt, and claims, das Reizwort des Kranken ist leise. The sick person's buzzword is quiet. We can imagine the scene, we have it in front of us, and we have empathy for this patient. The painful experience of hearing how others soften their voice and lower their tone and shh, 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 silent, but yet the dying person can hear us all perfectly well. So why is hearing that important? The old reading in tradition of philosophy has introduced logos as the magic term to capture thought, language, word, concept, you name it. Logos is a welcome signifier for the ever-powerful word in its facets since a few decades, so we thought we had finally overcome the dogmatic search for truth as one and for all concepts. Ludwig Wittgenstein, again, has been but a pioneer in offering the side path of understanding, parallel concepts with nuanced rather than fixed meanings. Definitions, he claimed often, have very little potential to help us grasp meanings when we need them. So the meaning of a word, he suggests, lies in its use. What sounds like a tautology, or even stronger, a paradox, a circular reasoning, is rather true. Don't search for an eternal, defined meaning. Restrain from Platonic ideas of concepts. The language reality that we have around us and we continue to build together shows how meanings shift and words embody nuances and shifts of meaning depending on their context. And now we come to the Italian hermeneuticist and psychoanalyst Gemma Corradi Fiumara in this beautiful book that you can still get secondhand if you're fast. Prices are rising after today. She refers to Ludwig Wittgenstein, and she recalls his example for us undergoing a new experience or our wish to avoid ambiguity. So we're back to the apple. And we listen to her on the first page of the book, which is a good motto for us now. Perhaps we could start out by admitting that there could be no saying without hearing, no speaking, which is not also an integral part of listening, no speech, which is not somehow received. She opts for a way that this uprooting language from a wider and deeper context in which the vast realm of listening could be included. So she invites us in our book, The Other Side of Language, to construct a philosophy of listening, and she says it's already there, we have just forgotten about half of logos. So there seems to be a blind spot on what Gemma Corradi Fiumara calls the other side of language. Logos, she claims, was garbled, cut off after the message has been free. So she claims, what about the listener? This side has been neglected. What about the one who receives the message? Language is no one-way system. It is a complex interplay of sender and receiver and the context that they're in. Every detail shifts what has arrived as meaning. Interpretation is a limbo business. It's fragile and soft. And Corradi Fiumara claims that the traditional understanding of logos has been infected by a monologos practice of language, taking into account mainly the sender perspective and garbling the rich notion of language and thought after it was uttered. So the receptive part, the hearing and the listener's perspective, has been neglected all along in the philosophy of language and the history of philosophy, except some exceptions, and she's very brave naming them up as far as she found them. There are few. Generally, even with the help of Heidegger's exegesis, so she was not shy even to call him, of the term logos, and its Latin root legein refers to a layout, a gathering of thought in front of us together as an overview waiting to be interpreted by both sides. So Corradi Fiumara claims that this conception of language as a complete interaction between saying and hearing promises a more integral way of understanding and usage of language. So we often disallow and disfavor anything which is ambiguous. Also, the psychological term tolerance of ambiguity, which is very much in fashion at the moment, reframes the human condition as a will to avoid plural meanings, equivocal interpretation, and ambiguity. We always strive to reach from ground, as Wittgenstein words it, and we wish to give rest to the eagerness to understand. Wanting to understand, getting the picture, is a focal human drive. We heard that before, and it helps us to spot dangers quickly. It's an evolutionary advantage to be able to do this. It allows us alertness and rigor and speed, but it does innerve our body, and it takes a lot of attention. Watching out for meaning takes energy. Waiting for the solution of a riddle creates a chemical cocktail of pure biological, neurological attentiveness, and you still don't know the answer, and you still have not heard what he is hiding from us. Getting it, relieve our body, the dopamine flood, the blood, the neurons, and then only they come to rest until the next riddle is presented to our minds. So the enemies of ambiguity shout relativism, arbitrariness, sloppiness. Only the enemy of pluralism dislike the idea of dissolving borders and bridging gaps and finding new access to modes of understanding which are not discrete, on or off, true or false. Chaos is disliked because we cannot view the pattern. We face times in which simple answers are needed by all who cannot cope with diversity of viewpoints and complex situations. So is it a rabbit or really is it a duck? We find parties established to fight for one or the other, as ambiguity is not welcome. Ambiguity is soft, it has blurry edges, we can never be sure whose head we have in front of us, a rabbit or a duck, or a querdenker. It is merely a simple symbol for the safety we allow ourselves to promise ourselves time and again for fixed meanings and for anti-ambiguity. Tolerance of ambiguity and awareness of multiple meanings is the claim of the day, and it has migrated from psychology into today's philosophy and the arts. Yet, we might argue, what about the information and the facts? Doesn't this worldview allow randomness and relativism inside the holy halls of rational thought? There's a message, there's a meaning pointed at by the speaker, and there's a message arriving at the hearer. Usually in the old days, the form of the message was one size fits all. It depended on what the speaker intended to say, and if anyone failed to get it, it was no one's fault, or the fault of the receiver and the hearer, or ignorance of audience. But Heidegger suggests that it might be helpful to us to rid ourselves of the habit of only hearing what we already understand. This attitude matches with the general vision inherent to the understanding and practice of aspectual seeing. Corradi Fiumara claims that there is a whole world yet to be discovered, not of unsolved issues, but of relationships among things we know, of ways in which they might fit together. So it clicks, aha, that makes sense. And in this research on aspect change and in this upcoming symposium in the Bern University of the Arts in October this year, and the publication Atlas of Aspect Change, a shared focal point can be made, and I would like to share with you a method I tried to invent for this book. So, aspectual seeing is a practice of multitude and polyvalent language. So, rather than an analytical, monoglous statement on objective facts, the possibility of simultaneous, subjective, slightly shifted perspectives becomes the methodological framework for understanding and for this book. That means writing a book on aspectual seeing alone would be rather silly. It would be a paradox, if not complete nonsense. So therefore, the book is edited as an array of voices, meeting in the spirit of meeting minds and real exchange. I risk failure. Everyone who speaks with me does, but we might come up with things that we would have never written in an article. The interdisciplinary exchange is set up in order to harvest a shared vocabulary on aspectual seeing. Let's remember that the gap between expertise vocabularies has been identified as the driving motor for conversations which question key notions from aspectual knowledge and ask the professionals to explain in simple words what they have to say about the concerning events and phenomena. So not just speak to the people in your own peer group, but to the ones outside of it, and if they nod and if they breathe in, they got it. So new metaphors can be in that way created spontaneously amongst the two representatives of these different disciplines, and they can be kept for later. Preserving speech after editing, expressions which cling with lay audience and experts are born, and from other disciplines, the language, after all, connects us beyond this expert jargon. Gemma Corradi Fiumara again, one of the first cognitive effects of listening suggests that there's not much that can really be seen from one point of view, and that parallel perspectives on the same object may actually reveal different worlds. In the listening approach, there's no one direction of interpretative choice that can claim better results. I like speed, I like change, I love directiveness. I enjoyed driving the car before I came all too aware of the awe of dangers implied. I'm a fast eater, reader, lover. We are fast, and we are quickly bored. People may dislike ambiguity, yet they are eager for news and distraction. Free radicals in chemistry are available atoms, unattached and full of lust to join. They are leftovers of existing structures. They are free to connect. Radical thought is a mode of expectancy. They want to be convinced, not objected. Expectations are at the core of our habits and motives for action, also to update our models of the world, claims Meyer. Now, looking at our models of the world without taking our expectations towards the world into account is as absurd as taking logos as merely speech without any listener. And radical thought does not equal violent thought. Again, the police have attached habits to something which in other worlds just means free. So I try to claim that practicing aspectual seeing and experiencing aspect change allows us to train this ambiguity muscle, to practice postponing judgment, to preserve the unpleasant state of uncertainty, and to sit with it as long as possible. It would allow us an attitude of listening. It could allow us a closer look at what otherwise escapes our attention, because we tend to look for what we have seen before and understood before, and what we have learned before. In this sense, the unheard of gets a new meaning. The other side of language is not only the other side of the same coin. It is not the second side only. It's not the B side of the record. It is another view, taking the recipient as more than the victim of the speaker. The other side is the unknown bay. It's the place of destiny. It's the shore to land on. And translations are known to hit the other side, the other shore, and to be specific and precise, yet never complete or perfect. The other side implies that there is a viewpoint from which I myself, the speaker, look tiny and insignificant, or powerful and mighty. The other side implies that there are places where the sun sets later and the dances are more vivid. The simple idea that subjectivity allows us to enjoy emotions, suffer or celebrate subjectivity implies the awareness of the other undergoing the same urgency of being in the center of one's perceptive cosmos. That's our problem. We are all in the center of our worlds. Our senses are sharpest where we are. The world is round, wrapped around us, each one of us. Use every single object. It's hard to cope with that I myself are so important mainly to myself and maybe those dependent on me. But hardly anyone knows me as well as I myself, and those close ones, and we share views only by proximity. But I'm also the one who is best capable of fooling myself. Always, when taking aspects of language into focus, the edges blur. And language has blurry edges as well. One can anyways not easily approach language with language means. It is itself vehicle and subject of investigation. Similarly, the schools and practices for understanding what understanding is and of interpreting interpretation are essentially endangered with lurking paradoxes and circular reasoning. Yet we have received proper tools for speaking and thinking on language, for instance, from hermeneutic practices, as they have offered metaphorical tools to follow and understand particular modes of understanding. And to remember the well-known example of fusion of horizons, Horizontverschmelzung, as a verbal image of the experience of understanding another's point of view. We literally are sharing a view towards the sea line, a horizontal event. In front of us, representing the possibility, if not ideal, of merging viewpoints through language. And this Dutch artist has proven that the horizon is horizontal. Hearing means deciphering, means assembling tunes, getting a riddle, unfolding a melody and a pattern. Acts of hearing imply hearing aspects change. It is a silent yet not passive position. It is a receiver's place, a seat in front row, but with no hurry. It means checking out the spectrum of meanings. It means listening to the whole sentence rather than finishing it for the other. It means comparing, testing, feeling the ground. It means following the suggestions our brain, memory, vocabulary, habits, experience, psyche provides us to untangle and unwrap the given proposition. So hearing aspects change, convey openness, leaves loose ends remain for long enough to be found and picked up. Hearing aspects change means allowing fugues of meaning to meander and fail, like it did this morning in this wonderful practice session, to produce and convey and frustrate. Understanding our place in the world is recreated by knowing our place in the audience. I thank you very much for your attention. I don't know if there's time for questions. We could do that. I don't know what the organization says. I'm ready to remain a little longer if things have been too radical. Yes? It is this one. Is it that one that you mean? This book, or? This book you would have to find online in the used bookstore. It is Gemma Corradi Fiumara, The Other Side of Language. It's published 1990. Yeah. She's not so much in fashion, but we can change that. She's still alive. She's working in Rome. And she writes beautifully, and the translation is well done, so what else do you want?
Ich wollte nur kurz nochmal sagen, fühlen Sie sich herzlich eingeladen, Fragen zu stellen. Sie können das sicherlich auch in deutscher Sprache tun. Aus hygienischen Gründen haben wir leider keine Mikrofone, die wir durchreichen können. Müssen Sie also bitten, sehr laut zu sprechen, um mit Frau Melzer ins Gespräch zu kommen.
My advantage was that I see all of you in the audience, and I saw some of your heads were shaking, some of you were laughing. I could see the eyebrows communicate, so it was not a total one-way street, which is nice. So I had some sort of response. At least some of you I know already have. We can have lunch later together or coffee. Maybe the good news for everyone who likes to fall back in love with Ludwig Wittgenstein and Gertrude Stein, which is of course a beautiful thing that they have both the Stein in the name, which is also part of this work, that it was lately published in Ludwig and Gertrude. I don't know if it's on this list. No, this year. Which is the shared vocabulary between both. So you can buy this book and you have an alphabetized list of all the words that they both used, just to be sure that you know where they have met. It's this list of words. And this book with the parrot is published in 2nd edition. It's also a treat for everyone who doesn't like to read but watch. And you can always use it if your table is shaking. So if there's no other questions now, maybe from your side, no? Then I will go back with my pony to my seat.
So there will be now the lunch break, and we are a little bit ahead of schedule. So the performance of Flora, in order not to have such a in order to not have a too big lunch break, we will do the performance of Flora at 3 o'clock. It was announced for 3:30. We were all a bit faster than expected with our introductions. So if it's fine for everybody, we'll do it at 3 o'clock. Yes? Okay, so have a nice lunch and see you soon.